Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to continue the adult education classes on play. Today, we'll be looking at the science of play and its implications for Christ followers. But first, let me share just a little bit about myself. I'm a PhD candidate in practical theology at Princeton Theological Seminary. And I'm also the digital learning designer at the seminary. So I've been working with faculty over the past couple of years to help them with their digital learning designs, helping them create good learning experiences for their students. My PhD dissertation is on what I'm calling the practice of prophetic listening in congregations as they reimagine models of ministry in their context. Before we delve into some of the science and theology that we'll be talking about today, I want to offer up this website for our time together. It's called Wakelet. If you open a new tab and go to wakelet.com, you'll see this kind of these boxes and options in the upper right-hand part of the screen. And if you click Enter Code, then you can enter the code for a shared Wakelet. It's kind of like a bulletin board together. And the code it's listed here. It's EB91DAE. So if you have any comments as you go through some insights, some aha moments that you want to share with other people that are watching this video, with me, if you have any questions for other people or for me, you can go to the site, use that code, and you'll be able to put them in there, and then we can see what each other is learning, and I'll be checking it over the next few days to see if there are any comments or questions so that we can all learn together, even though we're watching this potentially at different times. So if you want, just pause at any moment in the next 45 minutes with each other and go to the site, add your comment or question, and we can engage with each other in that way. All right, so just a little bit about where we're headed today. The first thing that we're going to do together is look at imaginative prayer. And I thought that it would be a nice way for us to start our time together by engaging in this practice. So I'll share a little bit about what the practice is, and then we'll actually do it together as we read scripture imaginatively in a kind of form of play. And then we'll delve into a little bit of psychology of play. I am in no way a psychologist or a scientist. I am a practical theologian, but I have taken a lot of classes in educational psychology and the learning sciences, so I hope to be able to share a little bit about what I've learned about the mind and play from the scientists and share that with you, and then we'll turn and put a theological lens on some of those things as we think about the science of play, our minds, and connect it to what God has revealed about who God is and who God has made us to be. And then we'll just conclude with looking a little bit about what the goal of play is in our lives as Christ followers. Okay, so imaginative prayer. I'm not sure if you are completely unfamiliar with this term or if you have engaged in this practice before, but it comes from Ignatius of Loyola, who was a kind of soldier turned a monastic in the late Middle Ages, and he offers us a lot of great practices for spiritual formation. One of those is called imaginative prayer. And it is related to this idea of Ignatian contemplation. There's a great description of it from Luther Seminary. They say that Ignatian contemplation is prayer with scripture. It is meeting God through story. The prayer develops as you live into a scripture story with all your senses and imagination. You become a participant in the story, and you continue in the story in your heart, mind, imagination, spirit, and body after the reading ends. You let the Spirit guide the prayer. You don't force anything to happen. You let it happen to you, within you, around you. So this idea of Ignatian contemplation and imaginative prayer, in my mind, is kind of like playing with Scripture. Instead of coming to Scripture with our intellectual thinking caps on, we're coming to the text imaginatively and playfully. So we're going to practice this together to start our time. And I'm going to be reading from Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. One aspect of imaginative prayer is related to Lectio Divina, if you've done that before, which usually involves reading through the text a few times. So I'll be reading through it actually 3 times, and each time we'll explore a different part of the story, a different kind of element of the story. And the point of that is for us to really just slow down, experience, feel, imagine, and be with the story, and let the Holy Spirit speak to us in the story. And at the end, in between the readings, I'll pause for a moment to let it sit with us. And at the very end, I'll leave a little bigger pause so that we can prayerfully think about what God might be saying to us from the story and what we might say in response to God from the story. So in the first reading of the text, I encourage you to listen to the story for broad strokes. So think about when does it take place, who's there, what happens. So we're just trying to get an initial kind of sense of the story and what's going on. Again, this is from Luke chapter 5. Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw 2 boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they'd taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. All right, in this second reading, I encourage you to listen for more details. Who are the major players in this story? Who else is there? What are they doing? How do they interact? What is the setting like? What time of day is it? What is the mood, the atmosphere? Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Okay, I'm going to do the third and final reading. Now, some of you at this point might be like, "This is the weirdest thing. I've never read scripture this way." But bear with me. It can be a very meaningful practice, but it can also be one that takes time and practice to really engage in. So just bear with me for this final reading as you try to imagine yourself in the story. So in this third reading, I will encourage you to begin to feel yourself in the story. Who are you, or what are you in the story? You might be a person in the story that's named, or you might be somebody else in the story. You might be an inanimate object, or an animal, or a part of the scenery. But sense that as you hear it read. What are you doing, thinking, feeling? Or what is being done to or with you if you're an inanimate object? What are the sounds? What do you hear? What are the smells? The other details about the location? What are the emotions and undertones that you notice? When the reading ends, let the story continue to unfold within you, in your imagination, in your mind, in your heart, as the person or object that you are. Let's read a final time. Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people. When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. What is God saying to you in this story, and how might you respond to God? Amen. If you want to share anything from that experience, something that you learned that God showed you, or something about the experience in general, you can pause now and you can go to the Wakelet and add your comments or reflections from that imaginative prayer that we did together. All right. So now we are going to do our quick dive into the psychology of play. Let's go. So in the 20s and 30s, there was a social psychologist named Lev Vygotsky. If you've taken an education course, if you've done something with psychology and kids, you've probably encountered the name Vygotsky. If not, it might just sound like a Russian name, and he was from the Soviet Union. He did a lot of research and experiments on young children. Think like preschool, kindergarten age kids, and especially about how they engaged in play and the kind of play that's like make-believe, imagination play. And he says this about kids at play. He says, in play, a child is always above his average age, above his daily behavior. In play, it is as though he were a head taller than himself. He continues, as in the focus of a magnifying glass, play contains all developmental tendencies in a condensed form. In play, it is as though the child were trying to jump above the level of his normal behavior. So Vygotsky, in all of his study of little kids and play, realized that there's something happening in play where kids are stretched and they are growing and they're learning and they're developing. And he was very curious about how play was helping kids grow and learn. So one of the most significant findings that Vygotsky had was that in play, again, think preschool, kindergarten, make-believe play, kids learn to move from lower mental functioning to higher mental functioning. And think lower mental functioning as being reactive. So their brains are working, but it's very, there's a stimulus and then the kid reacts to that. But in play, those reactions become more intentional. That's higher mental functioning. So there's some intention given to what the kids are doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it when they're engaging in this make-believe play. Another psychologist, Daniel L. Conan, who was a colleague of Vygotsky's, he studied similar things, and he wrote about 4 ways that higher mental functioning is increased in play in children. The first is that play impacts motivation. So he says that in play, kids set aside short-term goals for longer-term goals. So they're learning how to delay gratification a little bit and set a longer goal and then work their way toward that longer goal. So for example, if kids are playing restaurant, and they're make-believe play restaurant, they have to do a few things before they can actually play restaurant. They have to stop and make menus or imagine that there are menus there. They might stop and play food or go get some food. They would decide who's going to be the waiter, who's going to be the chef, who's going to be the person being served. So they have to delay their restaurant play in order to make the props and set up the environment and decide who's what role. So they're learning how to delay that and to be motivated to get to the restaurant play by setting up all of the rules. He also writes about how play facilitates cognitive decentering, is what he calls it. And that's where kids learn how to see things from other people's perspective. And this happens in play, especially in make-believe play, imaginative role-playing, where kids are playing other roles. So in the case of the chef, the kid, who's not a chef, is decentering. So they're imagining that they are a chef. And in my mind, this connects to ideas of empathy and kind of putting ourselves in other people's shoes, that young kids start to learn how to do this by playing. The third thing is that play helps children develop mental representation. So in play, kids learn how to separate the meaning of an object from its physical form. So for example, we talked about needing a menu. So this is a book. We're going to talk about this book a little bit later, but it's a book. But if I'm playing restaurant and it's all I have, all of a sudden this becomes the menu. So the meaning of the object is being separated from what it actually is. So there's a symbol then for a menu that is actually a book. Finally, he writes about how play helps children develop intentional behaviors. So we talked a little bit about this, moving from lower to higher mental functioning, that kids' behaviors become voluntary, their mental actions become intentional, they start to follow the rules of play instead of just reacting to the world around them. Vygotsky and others also write about play and imagination. So thinking about, we talked about the book and the menu, but it's the idea of imagining something as something else. So Vygotsky says at that critical moment, when a stick, that is an object, becomes a pivot for severing the meaning of horse from a real horse, so the stick then is becoming the horse, one of the basic psychological structures determining the child's relationship to reality is radically altered. For Vygotsky, it's not that imagination is required for play, but it actually helps shape it. So play, for Vygotsky, is what helps us develop our imagination. If you've heard of Vygotsky, you've probably heard of the zone of proximal development. This is arguably the term that he's most well known for. And the zone of proximal development essentially is the distance between what somebody can do on their own, the level of independent performance, and what somebody can do with some help, with some assistance. So this is what Vygotsky says about it. It's the distance between the actual developmental level as determined by independent problem solving and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers. So the zone of proximal development is the zone in between those two, where the person is by themselves and where they are with someone or a group of people that are maybe a little more advanced than them in whatever it is. So it requires someone with knowledge or skills beyond the learner, and that there's some type of social interaction, in this case play, where they're interacting and the student or the learner is able to observe and watch and engage that person who knows a little bit more. And there's something called scaffolding, that's the education term, and that could be one person or a group of people that's providing scaffolding, which is like a supportive activity to support the student as they're led through the zone of proximal development to get up to the level of where the other person is. So here's an example. Let's say there's a girl who's just starting high school and she's going to play on the volleyball team, but she only knows how to underhand serve. So that means kind of like punching it up from her arm. And she doesn't know how to overhand serve, which is what you need to play volleyball in high school. And they're practicing, and she keeps leaning forward too far so that when she hits it, it's always hitting down into the net, and it's not going over. The ball's not going over the net. And the coach is watching her and sees that she has the power that she needs in her arm. She's got good follow through, but that she's leaning forward too much every time when she's throwing it up and trying to hit it down. And so there's where she is when she's doing the serve again and again, practicing it by herself. And there's her zone of proximal development, which is where she can be with the coach, guiding her and assisting her, scaffolding her learning to play better, to play and hit the ball correctly. So then the coach can provide scaffolding. The coach could model it for her. The coach could come up, around her and help position her body the right way so that she can hit the volleyball correctly. So that's an example of the zone of proximal development kind of in action, but it happens all the time. And Vygotsky writes about this, and it's a key for him to play. And I said, he observed all these things with play, and part of it is the kids play with each other, and especially if they're different ages, or if there's, a group of kids that are ahead cognitively, ahead of other children, those other ones can catch up, can learn from the other kids or from even adults around them, and grow in that way. I'm going to switch to a different psychologist now. This is Wilma Kutzdahl. She wrote a book about 10 years ago, I have it here, called The Agile Mind. And in it, she essentially argues that we should try to develop an agile mind that thinks in all kinds of ways, and that will help kids grow and learn, but also will help older adults if they're having issues with cognitive decline. So she does some studies and shares some research on older adults losing some of their mental abilities with their brain, and that that agile thinking can assist with that. So the assumption is that our brains reshape and rewire over time. This is kind of where neuroscience is right now in thinking about our brains, that the neurons can connect in different ways and can be rewired if we engage in certain activities over time, and that it's very malleable. We have very squishy brains that are very malleable. And so Kutzdahl assumes this and writes about how our environments and our practices can help us develop mental agility. So this diagram might be very confusing. We won't go into it in depth or anything, but it's the framework that she writes about in her book that she calls the integrated, controlled, automatic, specific, abstract framework. So you can see the line, on either axis, there's abstract, specific, and controlled, automatic. So one relates to content, that we take in abstract content and we take in specific content. Abstract, like a concept, love, specific, like a book. But then also that we engage in different kind of processes in our thinking, from controlled to more automatic. So think of how, for example, our thinking can be controlled, regulated, slower, very intentional thinking, but we also have automatic, instinctual, very quick thinking, and there's a spectrum of the process of our thinking. And she essentially argues that in order to have agile thinking, we should be able to move all the way around this box, that we should be able to move from abstract to specific to controlled to automatic. We should be stretching all of those muscles in different ways. And part of that for her is play and creativity. And she writes about how it's important to engage in playful and intellectually challenging activities. Like I mentioned before, some of what she writes about is cognitive decline. And she says that engaging in these kinds of activities help build or maintain our agile thinking. And she says, based on her research, that it isn't just like the smart intellectual people that avoid cognitive decline as we age, but it's actually just people who engage in creative, intellectually active pursuits. So it's not a matter of one's IQ, but more a matter of the kinds of practices. Are they playful, creative, intellectually active? That one is, what one's environment is like. Are they going all the way around and engaging in all those different kinds of thinking? So she talks about playful agility and suggests that playful use of our brains helps keep our brains healthy. Before moving into the theological lens, just really quickly want to talk about differences in play. There's different kinds of play, and there's also different kinds of players, if that makes sense. So in terms of different kinds of play, there's an author, Mitchell Resnick, who wrote a book called Lifelong Kindergarten, and he writes about play, the playpen and the playground, and how those are different kinds of play. And so an example of a playpen is that it's play that is more structured. So you get a Lego box, and it comes with a book, and the book gives you very clear step-by-step guides of what piece to put where, when. And you could follow that. And it's playing, but it's very structured. There's step-by-step directions. You're learning something, but he says it's not the full potential of creative thinking. Creative thinking happens more in playground play, which is like dumping a box of Legos on the table and making something crazy out of it. So one is a more structured kind of play, and one is less structured. and the less structured play leads to more creative thinking. But then also, we play differently. We're kind of bent toward different kinds of play. There's a study by Howard Gardner and Denny Wolfe, who are educators, that they studied how children interact with toys. And they identified two primary styles of play: patterners and dramatists. Patterners are fascinated by structures and patterns. They enjoy blocks and puzzles. But dramatists are interested in stories and social interaction, dolls and stuffed animals. So you might already be thinking like, oh, I'm definitely this kind of, I'm a dramatist or I'm a patterner. But connecting that idea of different kinds of players to Kutzdahl and her idea of agile thinking and the agile mind, I would maybe suggest that even if we maybe tend toward one kind of play over the other, that we should try to expand our play horizon. And maybe we like structured play, but maybe we should just try to not do the paint by number and just dump a bunch of paint into a bowl and smear it around a canvas and see what happens. And that could help stretch our creativity and the way that we engage in play. Okay, so now let's make some connections to theology and to what any of this might have to do with our lives as Christians. So we have a lot that we can learn from science, and science is always changing. But as Christians, we see the world through the lens of who God is, who God has made us to be, who God's revealed God's self to be. And so we want to put that lens onto the other things that we've talked about and try to see if any of that might help us understand play and the science of play in some meaningful ways for our lives. The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of freedom in play. Vygotsky says something really interesting about this. He says the role the child plays and her relationship to the object, if the object has changed its meaning. So again, if we're thinking about the restaurant and the menu or something like that, will always stem from the rules. That is, the imaginary situation will always contain rules. In play, the child is free, but this is an illusory freedom. And I think this is so fascinating because when we think about our lives in Christ, there is also this idea of freedom, but there's an idea of boundaries in that freedom. And it reminds me of Psalm 16, where the psalmist says that the boundary lines have fallen in pleasant places, that the freedom that God gives us is actually free. So it's different than what Vygotsky says. It's not an illusory freedom. I would say it's an actual freedom, but it's a redefined freedom that has bounds. It has rules. And I think that play can help us discover and enjoy a freedom with rules. I think that's just a really interesting insight from Vygotsky and connecting it to our understanding of freedom in Christ and the bounds that come with that are wonderful and beautiful and that we can be so grateful for. The next thing is playing with scripture. So we did this a little bit at the beginning of our time together with our imaginative prayer. I think that often we come to scripture with our intellectual thinking caps on, and that's fine. That's good. We need to do that. We need to look critically at scripture and learn from the historical context, from what's been said by the author, and look at it with our literary lens. But there's also something to be said for engaging imaginatively and playfully with it. This relates to the idea of empathy and role-playing that, as we saw with the make-believe and Vygotsky saying that, kids are learning how to do this at a young age, that we can do this with scripture, and that there's so much that the Holy Spirit can show us if we close our eyes and imagine that we're in a scene where Jesus is and see what Jesus might be showing us in that moment. I also think that play is really important in scripture related to Jesus's parables. And we learned about play and how it helps kids move from lower mental functions to higher mental functions, but also related to that, the kind of abstract thinking or the symbolic thinking, the representation of objects that play allows for. And I think that Jesus's parables do that. And that in order to really understand what he's trying to do in those parables, we have to play with him a little bit, play with them a little bit, and explore the kind of creative meaning of the symbols and the ideas and the concepts that he's trying to get across in his parables and his stories. So this one I'll just touch on really quickly. I said I was going to get back to this book. This is Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Life Together. And he writes about the community of believers in the book. It's his first chapter. And he says that Jesus is the one that ties us in our community together. So we don't just interact with the Christians we want to be around. We interact with everybody. We worship and witness and walk alongside everybody. And what that means is that our group of Christ followers is a hodgepodge of people. We have a random group of people, and we come together to worship and witness and learn how to follow Christ together. People of all ages and skills and background and knowledge, people with different levels of maturity in their faith lives. So if we think about church in this way, as this hodgepodge of people that are connected in Christ, and then we think about the zone of proximal development, then what Paul writes about growing up spiritually in the faith and learning from more mature mentors makes a lot of sense. That we engage and interact and worship and play alongside other believers, and we can grow, we can watch, we watch and other people model for us what it looks like to live a Christian life. So think about the kind of intergenerational play that happens in children's Sunday school classrooms, in the nursery, at Vacation Bible School. I think we can be intentional about building these elements of play and intergenerational engagement into our lives and ministries. I want to end on the dark side of play. I happen to be 28 weeks pregnant with our first child, and I sent my husband a Facebook post with these pictures that came on my feed. And I asked him if he was ready. So I'll flip through them really quickly. So you can see, I'm sure you know, if you've had kids, if you've been around kids, I'm about to find out that sometimes play gets out of hand. That play can be malformative. Play can hurt ourselves and can hurt other people. It can get us into trouble. I'm sure that it wouldn't take much time for you to think about the ways that even as adults that we play sinfully. This makes me think of Augustine, who writes about sin as kind of clouding of the mind. And, we've been talking a lot about the mind and about play, and just that sin or play doesn't escape sin and sinfulness. We see it also in Calvin's idea of total depravity, that even something as innocent and beautiful and creative and imaginative as play is still permeated by sin. Just like we can think sinfully, we can act sinfully, we can play sinfully. So just wanted to make sure that I pause here and mention this because it's something that could easily be glossed over or left out, but it's there when we think about play and when we think about our minds. Our minds are also affected by sin and how we're able to learn and grow. And it could be, like I said, malformative, so we could be formed and shaped in play in bad ways as well as good. So what is the goal of play as Christians? Why play? I would say that the goal of play for us is to live our fullest lives in Christ. To live our fullest lives in Christ. I love this quote by John Dewey. John Dewey's an educator from the 20th century. And he says that playfulness is a more important consideration than play. The former is an attitude of mind. The latter is a passing outward manifestation of this attitude. So play is great. It's a thing that we do. But playfulness is this idea that it's an attitude that we carry with us. It reminds me a little bit of virtue ethics. And Aristotle writes about this in Nicomachean Ethics, that if we do an action over a certain amount of time, we become that kind of person. So if we engage in a loving action again and again and again, we become a loving person. And I think that play is similar, that if we play and we practice playing, we can improve at play, and then we become a playful person. And I think that we are called as Christians to engage in play and to become playful. And so I encourage you, I'm leaving you today with this idea of playfulness and to be playful in the Spirit. So if you have any comments and questions, again, I encourage you, once this video ends, to go to Wakelet, to put in that code, to add your comments and questions and share and engage online with each other in that way. Thank you so much for spending this time with me.